Hey y'all, welcome to the very first episode of the very much anticipated Barbecue Booze and Life podcast. I'm your host, George, and we're going to kick off this podcast with talking about the OG of barbecue. Now, I don't need you folks out there going, well, yeah, there's a lot of... No. The world-renowned OG of barbecue who has perfected the trade is Texas, okay? The Great Republic of Texas. And I know that there's going to be some more of you saying, well, the Germans, they're known for smoke. Yeah, we understand all that. But Texans took it and ran with it. And we become world-renowned for our brisket. Specifically, our Central Texas brisket. Now, throughout this podcast, we're going to be talking about different styles of barbecue, the way we do it across this country and other countries. Hopefully, we're going to go down south, maybe cross the ponds. Talk about how people are cooking all across the world. I feel like not much has changed ever since we discovered fire, right? But the seasonings and things like that have changed. Even in Texas, great things are happening in barbecue. We've kind of left the salt and pepper era, and we've entered into this new world of people mixing the Central Texas style with their culture. We're seeing Egyptian barbecue. We're seeing Mexican Texas barbecue. We're seeing Vietnamese Texas barbecue. We're seeing all sorts of different fusion of barbecue. But at the heart, it's still Texan. What makes Texas brisket, unique from any other brisket? Well, if you want to call your brisket a Texas brisket, there are a couple of elements to it. There's definitely smoke. And I will tell you, the first time I tried to smoke a brisket myself, I made the error of using mesquite wood. I love grilling with mesquite charcoal. I think it adds really great flavor to the meat and things like that, but there's something about smoking with the wood that just adds this awful bitter flavor to the food. So ever since that first cook, I stopped using mesquite. So when I talk about smoke, we're talking about using post oak wood. Post oak will give the meat this light, smoky flavor to it. It's not overbearing. It's not bitter. I've never gone back to using any kind of other wood. Now, if you want to throw in some cherry, which I found has worked really well with beef, go for it. You want to do a little bit of apple. I mean, if you've tried other things and it works for you, go for it. But you're not allowed to call it a Central Texas brisket. That's like making Napolitano pizza in your Whirlpool oven. It's just, it's great. It's all the same ingredients, but you didn't use the right oven. So it's not a Napolitano pizza. It's not a Texas brisket. All right, so we've talked about smoke. What comes next? Let's talk about seasoning. We might touch on trimming. I don't personally believe trimming has any kind of bearing on calling it a Central Texas style brisket. However, I am a fan of trimming. I learned how to trim from a Franklin barbecue video, but now there's tons of guys on YouTube that are, showing you some really great tips and tricks on how to prepare a brisket for the smoker. All right, and I'm not talking about your pellet. You want to use a pellet smoker? I've got one. I don't feel good about it. I feel like I'm committing blasphemy. So the briskets I make on that thing have not earned the title. But prior to having a pellet smoker, I had a stick burner. Some cheap stick burner that I bought from a base exchange, right? I think I paid like $200 for it. Those work, and they work well. Now, you'll probably end up using more energy to keep the fire at the temperature that you want, but I had no problem cooking in that thing. The experience that I had with the lesser gauge of steel was that, it goes back to the over energy usage, but because I had a hard time controlling the temperature and I had to use more energy, I really had an issue with maintaining it at that 225. So I'd start that big fire, try to bring her down. If I got down to 225, 250 range, I might as well just kiss my fire goodbye. So I always had to cook my briskets a little faster, even though I'm a big believer in low and slow. And that's unfortunately something I'll give to the pellet smokers. They unfortunately do a pretty good job of maintaining that even heat throughout the whole cook. However, for those more heavy duty smokers, I think you're going to have an easier time controlling the temperature. So now that we've talked about smoke, one of the other things that makes it a legitimate Central Texas barbecue is just using salt and pepper. Just salt and pepper. If you want to pollute your brisket with any other seasonings, you can. It's no longer an official Central Texas barbecue. Again, and it's one of the things we'll cover in future episodes is there's an evolution of barbecue right now, in my opinion. I love brisket. I love barbecue. But it was just getting to that point where the only thing that was setting one place apart from the other were the sides, right? But now we're starting to see that all these other cultures are adding their flavor to the way we do barbecue down here, and it's really changing the game. Okay, so now that you have your smoke, now that you have your seasoning, the technique after that really varies, okay? I'm not saying you got to wrap, and there might be some people that disagree with me out there. I'm not saying you got to wrap your brisket for it to be considered a Central Texas barbecue, because each brisket is different, right? The internal temps of these briskets are more than likely always going to throttle out. I have seen some folks on YouTube who have said they've pushed through these temperature barriers, so where for me, for some reason, all my briskets end up stalling at like the 150 degree range. Some of these folks and some of the instructions you'll find online will say, well, take it to 175 and then you got to wrap it. All right. Before we talk about wrapping, I just want to say that you want to pay attention, however you're monitoring the temperature of your brisket. All right. After the first few hours, you got to pay attention to how quickly the internal temperature is going up. That will give you a good idea of where your meat's going to stall. So if I see that, I use a Meter Plus right now. Okay, so the Meter Plus will show you the gradual increase in temperature. So if I see that I went from an internal temp of 97 degrees to 140 in 3 hours, and then the next hour after that, it creeped up to 150 at maybe half the time or a third of the time slower, then I know that I'm probably going to stall out in the 150 somewhere. So you just got to keep an eye out however you're taking the temperature, if you're probing it or if you have one of these Bluetooth Wi-Fi thermometers that's actively monitoring the increase in temperature, internal temperature. That's something to pay attention to. The OGs, though, the master pit masters, if you can say that, in Texas have smoked so many briskets, they just know from holding the damn thing or touching it or just looking at the moisture, pooling on top of it, whether she's going to be ready or not to get wrapped. So that takes me to my next point. Wrapping. I have seen the guys from Meat Church do a side-by-side wrapping with butcher paper and foil. Okay, and as a result, if I recall correctly, wrapping it in foil cooked slightly faster and the bark was a little bit more mushy. But other than those two things, there's virtually no difference in both. I prefer to use butcher paper, okay? The reason why I prefer to use butcher paper is that the oak and the charcoal that I use to cook has such a light taste to it that I still want to get some of that smokiness through the butcher paper into the meat, also to help not only maintain the integrity of the bark, but to give me that nice smoky ring that everybody likes to do when you slice into the brisket. All right. Now, without being able to show you, I'd like to get a little bit into how to carve the damn thing when it's done. All right. Now we're just leaving, the areas of the cook that would constitute the brisket as a Central Texas brisket. Okay, so now we're going into carving. There are great videos online how to carve the brisket. I think, the Mad Scientist has really good videos on how to cut into it. Franklin has good videos on how to cut into it. This is very important to maintain the integrity of the meat, that you cut it a certain direction, because you're going to cut the flat differently from the point. The point, I'm going to do my best to describe this without you seeing it, is going to be cut up and down from left to right. Okay? And then the flat gets cut horizontally. And that probably doesn't make much sense the way I described it. But when you're cutting into it, there's a really neat way that I've described. I'm laughing as I think about it because it's really inappropriate. So I'm not going to go into great detail because I don't know, the age range of the folks that are going to be listening to this. But as you're cutting the flat and you get closer to the tip, you're going to know you're going to start seeing like this kind of open gap inside the meat. All right. And when you see that open gap and it starts to get a little fattier, then you know you've reached the tip. Okay. So then you got to turn it sideways and you got to start cutting right to left or left to right. All right. I like to do my flat cuts about a pencil thick, and then my tip cuts I do slightly thicker than that because it's going to fall apart. Okay, if it's been cooked the right way and you pulled it off at the right temp, which for me it's 205 plus. After you've let it rest, I'm sure it's probably 210ish or so. You pull that baby out to carve, then you want to make sure you've let it rest for about an hour. I've known many people, they do it different ways. I've taken a brisket off the pit, wrapped it in a towel, put it in a cooler at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 11 o'clock lunchtime, when it was getting cut into at work, it was still warm. It was still warm for serving. So, you just kind of want to gauge it depending upon when you want to eat, you want to serve it. But it's usually, the recommendation is 1 hour. You got to let it rest for at least 1 hour because you just abused that piece of meat. All right. And you get your dirty minds out of the gutter. All right. So you've just abused it. You need to get it time to rest so all the juices from the brisket can get sucked back in. All right. I love the brisket. I think it's very versatile. It's a very versatile piece of meat. You could do a lot of different things with the leftovers. Well, you see a lot of people do mac and cheese. See a lot of people do tacos. You see a lot of people they stuff it into they do like jalapeno poppers with it. I love it. All right, we plan on making one for Christmas lunch. Happy holidays to everybody out there, by the way. I'm excited that you're here with me listening to this first official podcast for Barbecue Booze and Life. I hope you enjoyed this journey with me. And if you didn't hear the trailer, the whole point of this is I just want to share my passion of barbecue with y'all. All right. And maybe every once in a while, I'll have some clown that joins me on the show and we can talk about some current events, maybe some social issues, some pop culture, but that's personally something I'm going to try to avoid simply because I think we're all overburdened by all that. All right. So I'm happy that you all are here with me today. I hope you enjoy my content. I hope you enjoy what you hear over the next few months or however long this lasts. After we leave Texas, which there's still a lot to cover in Texas since we are the kings. We are from the great Republic of Texas, showing the world how barbecue is supposed to be done correctly. We're probably going to head up to Kansas or California. It breaks my heart to have to talk about Kansas because they like to just drown everything in sauce up there. But hey, they like it. That's how they want to do it. It's because they lack in skill and cooking skill, so they have to cover it up with sauce. But my intent is it's either that or we're going to go straight into California, where California is well known for tri-tip and their Santa Maria style of grilling. But for the next few episodes, we're going to stay in Texas. We still got to talk about ribs. Still got to talk about sausage, and we still got to talk about the fusion that we're starting to see from places out of Austin, even San Antonio and Houston, where you're seeing Mexican flavors, Vietnamese flavors, Egyptian flavors, all finding its way into Texas style barbecue. All right, so I don't know where you are today, if you're in your car, if you're at home, if you're at the office. I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a safe drive. And thank you again for joining me for the first official episode of Barbecue Booze and Life. Take care and keep grilling.